This is part two of a two-part video, flipped class video, on the introduction to molecules and equations. If you didn't get a copy of the actual assignment that we're using with this flip video, you can go to my website, www.tinyurl.com/Rafalik Go to the chemical reactions page, and it's going to be the assignment titled Introduction to Molecules and Equations. Once again, this is the second part, so if you haven't seen the first part, go back and watch that first. We're going to pick up on the second side of the paper. As I said, this is the second side of the assignment that we're going to be working on, and we're going to work our way down the paper, and hopefully by the end of this you'll have a good understanding for how to count atoms and molecules and elements with any complexities like parentheses and coefficients. Alright, going back to what we learned before, we have a coefficient in the front, it's 3. And that basically means that we have 3 of this molecule, H4P2O7. So this is another way of saying we have H4P2O7, H4P2O7, and another H4P2O7. Now the easier way to do these problems, instead of counting these all up, is just to use multiplication. So how many hydrogen do we have here? Well, that subscript is a 4, and there's a coefficient. So the first question we're always going to ask is there a subscript? Yes, there's a subscript, there's a 4. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there is. So 4 times 3 is 12. And we always just move from left to right, makes things a lot easier. The phosphorus, is there a subscript? Yes, there's a 2. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there's a 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Is there a subscript? Yes, there's a 7. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there's a 3. 7 times 3 is 21. Now we can ask how many total elements there are. And again, anytime we ask about how many elements there are, I'm going to ask you to list them. So how many elements are there? There's hydrogen, phosphorus, and oxygen. There are 3 total elements. And how many atoms are there? How many total atoms? Well, that's a little more complicated. Here we get to add them all up. So 21 and 12 together would be 33, and 6. So there are 39 total atoms. Right, oftentimes when you get one of these problems on an assignment, they're not going to separate them out and ask you how many H, how many P, how many O. You're going to have to do that yourself. So in this example, 3 H4SiO4, they ask you to list the elements and their quantities. So how many elements are there? Well, let's just start going from left to right. First we encounter the H. Is there a subscript? Yes, there's a 4. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there's a 3. 4 times 3 is 12. Silicon. Is there a subscript? Now there's not a subscript shown there. So what do we know that subscript to be? An invisible 1. And I'll often draw that invisible 1 there. 1 times 3 is 3. Don't forget that that 1 has to be multiplied times that 3. And then the O. 4 times 3 is 12. How many total elements? Again, when I ask elements, you have to be able to list them. Hydrogen, silicon, and oxygen. There are 3. How many total atoms? 12 and 3 is 15, and 12 is 27. Okay. Make sense? Now we get to the part of counting atoms that tends to scare people the most, but it really shouldn't, the dreaded parentheses. So what the parentheses mean is that there's an SO4 unit attached onto this aluminum 3 different places. So this SO4 is here, here, and here. So the rule is that when we have parentheses, we have to deal with that just like we do in math. Everything inside these parentheses is times this 3. Okay, so we deal with the parentheses first, and then we work our way out. So in this example, if we were to move from left to right, AL, first thing we're going to ask, is there a subscript? Yes, there's a subscript. Now the next question becomes, is there parentheses? There are no parentheses around the AL. And then is there a coefficient? There's no coefficient. So 2, doesn't have anything else to be multiplied times? All we have is 2. How many sulfurs do we have? Is there a subscript? No, there's no subscript shown, so we know that subscript is going to be an invisible 1. Is there parentheses? Yes. What is the number outside the parentheses? It's a 3. 1 times 3. And the next question would be, is there a coefficient? But there isn't any, so this would be a 3. O, is there a subscript? Yes, there's a 4. Is there parentheses? Yes, there's still a parentheses. This 3 is times the S, and this 3 is times the O. 3 times 4 is 12. So there are 12 oxygen atoms, 3 sulfur atoms, and 2 aluminum atoms. There's 1 molecule. All of this is 1 molecule, and there are 1, 2, 3 elements. Okay. Why don't you try doing this one on your own for just a moment. Pause the video and then see if you got it correct. How many ALs? Is there a subscript? So 1. Are there parentheses around the AL? No. Is there a coefficient? No. So 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. How many O's do we have? Okay, is there a subscript? No. So it's an invisible 1. Is there parentheses? Yes, that O is inside parentheses. So 1 times 3 is 3. And is there a coefficient? There is still not a coefficient. Hydrogen. Is there a subscript? Invisible 1. Just like the oxygen times the 3 inside the parentheses, it's 3. How many total atoms? There are 6, and 1 is 7. How many elements? 1, 2, 3. Notice that sometimes they'll ask you about elements first, sometimes they'll ask you about atoms first, and sometimes they won't ask you about one or the other at all. Make sure that you are answering the question that they ask, not the question you think they ask. Okay, let's go ahead and try doing this one and see if you can get the answer. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, if we start at O, O is an invisible subscript of 1. Is there a parentheses? No. Is there a coefficient? No. Carbon, invisible subscript of 1. Is there parentheses? No. Subscript? No. Also a 1. N, invisible subscript of 1. Is there parentheses? Yes. 1 times 2. Is there a coefficient? No. And finally, H, subscript of 2, parentheses 2. 2 times 2 is 4. Is there a coefficient? No. So 4 is all we have. How many total elements? In this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Whenever I ask about elements, remember, the key word to elements is to list them. How many total atoms? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 is 8. Now we're going to put all of it together. And it really doesn't get any more complex. So if we start from the beginning, we have a K. Is there a subscript? A 1. Are there parentheses around it? No. Is there a coefficient? Yes. So that's 1 times 4 is 4. We'll move on to the next. AG. We know AG is one element. It's not A and G because the G is lowercase. Is there a subscript? It's an invisible 1. Are there parentheses around it? There are not. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there's a coefficient of 4. So 1 times 4. Now we go to the C. Is there a subscript? Yes. Is it inside parentheses? Yes. So 1 times 2. Is there a coefficient? Yes, there's a 4. So for this case, it's 1 times 2, which comes from the subscript from the parentheses, times 4, which is in front. So there are 8 carbon. How about nitrogen? Same is true for nitrogen. Is there a subscript of 1? Are there parentheses? Yes, there's a 2. 1 times 2. And a coefficient of 4. 1 times 2 times 4 is 8. So how many of each type of atoms are there? There you go. If I asked you how many elements are there, what would you say? Remember, you have to list them. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different elements. All right, your final check to see if you understand this. 3PbNO3 I want to know how many atoms, how many elements, and how many molecules. Go ahead and see if you can figure that out. Good luck.